Welcome to Trash Compactor. I'm Josh. This is a special episode in honor of Star Wars Podcast Day 2023. February 7th marks 24 years since the premiere of Jedi Talk, the very first Star Wars related podcast. Before podcasts were even a thing, I'm pretty sure. So I guess it was, Star Wars talk show. And we're proud to take part in this third annual Star Wars Podcast Day with the rest of the Star Wars podcast community. February 7th also happens to be my dad's birthday, so happy birthday, Dad. And
Happy birthday.
Today we're going to be asking the question, will Disney ever remake the original Star Wars? And joining me in the Trash Compactor for this discussion is Bracey.
Hi, happy to be here.
And John.
Hello.
So, yeah, remaking Star Wars. It's kind of a provocative question, but before we get to that, I want to talk a little about the Instagram post I saw that inspired this episode. It was a post made a couple of months ago from a Star Wars fan account, and what it was the poster for the original Star Wars A New Hope, and the poster had written underneath it, "Why is it low-key underrated? It's so fun to watch. Darth Vader is badass." And I saw this in my feed. I saw this in my feed and I was a bit dumbfounded, to be honest. I mean, not even in like a judgmental way. Like, I'm not saying like, how could you say this? But I was intrigued, and I went through the rest of the kid's posts, and it became clear very quick. He was 14 years old, which means he was born in 2008. I actually reached out to him to see if he'd be interested in coming on the pod to talk about what he meant and what his experience was and where he was coming from when he wrote that. But he
His mom
never,
said no.
yeah, yeah, but he never responded.
Stranger
Which
danger.
is, which is probably just as well. It's a double-edged sword responding to random strangers on the internet who are more than twice your age. So I totally understand his desire to not.
Smart move, kid. Well
Yeah,
played.
smart.
Well played.
But yeah, so Star Wars: A New Hope. Why is it low-key underrated? It's so fun to watch. You know, it just struck me that Star Wars, the movie Star Wars, the original movie, is no longer the central text of the larger phenomenon that is Star Wars, which is, it's a little hard for me to compute. So just, first off, I'm just curious what your reactions are to the idea that Star Wars is low-key underrated by a certain generation.
Well, I'll say that like when the Phantom Menace came out, or I think it was the Clone Wars actually. After that, my brother was like, he actually preferred the newer ones because he was like the puppet, he couldn't get past the puppet in Empire, and so that kind of already gave me this oh, the world is not what I thought it was. And then when Captain America Civil Wars came out and there was a fight between all the Marvel characters and they actually had Spider-Man be like, "Hey, did you guys ever see this really old movie? It's called Empire Strikes Back." Like when that became part of popular modern media, that perspective, I was like, all right, well, yeah, we're old now. Like I'm old now. I'm officially old now. If the popular pop movie is referencing something that I grew up with, and I was like, that's a staple of just sci-fi, even though it's fantasy, but sci-fi, and in my mind, and like now it's just being treated like it's like how I looked at Lawrence of Arabia. Like, it's just like it's old. It's old.
Yeah, I think it's just funny thinking that someone calls the original Star Wars like low key underrated. It's just like, but I do find it interesting that like every generation has their movies, and I feel like that's sort of like a sign of this kid like going on his own journey of discovering movies. So I feel
Mm.
like to him and his peers, it's underrated, and he's like, oh, like it's almost like he's not talking to us. He's talking to people, other eighth graders, whatever, and like yo, no guys, it's like worth checking out. And so I've done this with other people in the past, where like I find out that, a lot of people didn't see The Godfather. And it's like, why? Because they think it's like going to be like Goodfellas and The Sopranos, and they're not into mobster stuff. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's not what you think it is. It's like, check it out. It's really good, type of thing. So I feel like this is kind of like a version of that with a kid. It's like he's talking to a crowd that's like not aware of something that's like fucking epic, you know? It's like if someone's tried talking to me about like Duke Ellington, I'll be like, oh, okay, like I'll go check it out. But you know, it's like like no, you would like you, John, would really like it. Like, okay, I'll go look at it. I think that's kind of like the way I see this comment, you know?
But I would even say though, like, because so much stuff has been built off of it, like, I'm actually very impressed that people go back and they see it and they
Yeah.
actually have the value because, like,
Hmm.
so much, like, has been, kind of grafted off of that and, like, modernized that, like, if you can go back and, like, dust off the the non-letterbox, whatever it is that you're whatever version you're looking at it
Hmm.
in, like, warts and all, you're able to see the value in it. I think that's actually fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's going to keep happening too. Like with all the Jurassic World movies, like someone's going to go back and watch Jurassic Park and be like, "Oh shit!" Someone's going to keep hearing about this Back to the Future movie and watch it and like, "Oh shit!" Like it's. I think it's going to happen a lot over the as time goes on.
Yeah, that's actually what I was gonna say. Bracey, you made me realize that, I'm actually happy that someone who's 14 years old now went back and watched the original Star Wars and actually liked it, right?
Yeah.
That's the best thing to come out of that story is that he went back, discovered it, and loved it, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can even remember as a kid watching the original trilogy, like, you're aware that there's a jump in not quality, but there's a jump in what these movies can do from Star Wars to Empire to Return of the Jedi. It's like, when you compare, I had some friends for whom the original Star Wars of the three was their least favorite because it had, like, the least, stuff in it
Hmm.
for lack of a better like so even for our generation growing up with the three original trilogy films on TV and VHS, like there was still a little of that. And it is interesting, like this kid in his avatar was a character from the Clone Wars cartoon. So his intro to Star Wars, and I wish he was here so he could tell us for sure, but his intro to Star Wars was cartoon shows and these new movies that came out when he was 7.
Yeah,
So it's interesting, like Star Wars as a movie is not central to Star Wars the phenomenon, like the
yeah,
mythology of it. It's just sort of like the spark that lit the fire. But like, it's not integral to what Star Wars is now. It's like you can be a Star Wars fan and not even have seen that movie.
Which is a
yeah.
crazy idea to
I know.
us, like classically trained
Yeah,
Star
yeah,
Wars fans.
exactly. Classically trained. Like, especially being on Instagram, you could see how, like, because of the algorithms, they keep thinking like, "Oh, you must like Star Wars. You like all these Star Wars memes or whatever." And literally 100% of the uh, the stuff that I get that's like fed to me for Star Wars uh, references the prequels as like the linchpin for almost everything. And the
Yeah.
majority of it, like, it made me realize that like when people talk about Star Wars, even the jokes and things that they're talking about all of this ancillary content that's not the movies. Like they're talking about the Clone Wars cartoons, they're talking about the comics, they're talking about the TV shows, and like they're not talking about the movies. And it's just like Star Wars is no longer movies. Like Star Wars is now just a culture. Star Wars is now like just a thing. And when we were talking on the phone recently, Josh, like like Star Wars is TV now. And they keep saying how they're gonna make more Star Wars movies, but like I don't know when the next Star Wars movie is gonna come out. Like and it's kind of like a weird thing where like for a generation of people, they're gonna think of like Star Wars. Oh yeah, all those cool TV shows. Oh, they're making a movie. How cool is that? Like oh,
Yeah,
that'll be like a special event when they make a movie. And it's like, well, yeah, it's like they were
used to
movies.
be.
You know? Yeah, it's like, and
Used to
it's
be a
just
real
so weird
special
to think
event.
of it that way. To everyone, to now, I think for the majority of Star Wars fans out there, besides the old school, um, Obi-Wan Kenobi's Ewan McGregor, you know?
Yeah, I
To
mean,
us, it's like Alec Guinness, and then like Ewan
no,
McGregor
I
is
mean,
like truly
frankly,
taking the mantle where it's like Ewan McGregor has done way more for the role than Alec Guinness ever did, you know?
yeah, I mean, frankly, I agree with that. It's like in my
Yeah.
mind, I think Ewan McGregor is Obi-Wan Kenobi more than Alec Guinness. Um, so yeah, so the question arises, and I'd seen this question floating around on social media. So with that said, with Star Wars, the movie Star Wars no longer at the center of the Star Wars phenomenon, this idea that Disney or someone, though it will be Disney, do you think they will ever remake the original trilogy?
Uh,
Absolutely.
I know Bracey and I have different opinions on this, but
Oh, there are a couple of separate questions here. Will they? Should they? How would they do it? Right?
So let's start with the would they?
would they? My opinion, at least in George Lucas's lifetime, they seem to be holding those original films as kind of sacred. That's why they won't even release the theatrical versions. Um, Culturally speaking, they still resonate. Like when people talk about like them being registered with like Congress for like cultural significance and stuff like that can't be repeated for what they did. It's almost like Michelangelo's David and stuff like that. Like they are what they are. But but with the way technology is going and what they've already done with the Mandalorian and young Luke Skywalker and making a solo movie and all this shit, like I think they will have more stories with those characters in the future. But I don't necessarily think they'll just go back and redo it. I think they might have more Luke Skywalker stuff and everything like that. I also think they're going to be a little bit more with all the characters that they have now that they're bringing to form from like the cartoons and the comics and all that stuff. Like I feel like they now have a library of people uh for more stories to use that they don't need to use the original characters anymore. So I feel like in a weird way, like by having the old movies still intact and not remade, that creates a straight line to what their future is going to be. And if they go back and reboot it, then it's like at that point they'll just reboot everything ad nauseum. And I don't think that's necessarily what they're going to do. Like I don't like that means they're going to reboot the prequels. That means they're going to reboot the sequels. That means they're going to reboot the Mandalorian. And it's just like
No, but not
it's
no,
it,
but not necessarily
well,
because
it gave it like another 100 years. Like they might like you see what I'm trying to
no.
say.
Well,
It's like I
another
feel like, or maybe like a 20. But you know what I'm trying to say is like the same logic could apply to literally everything that they're making now. So that's why I don't necessarily think they're gonna do it because it would just be like a repeating theme, you know. Whereas instead of just keep going, I think they're gonna get to like episode 27, you know? Like, I think they're just gonna keep going with the episodes and keep making more things and then make in between stories with like, "Oh, we'll bring Luke Skywalker back digitally for this thing and whatever," but, like, I don't think they're gonna go back and redo the old shit because it's there.
Bracey, what do you think?
Well, at some point, one thing is at some point, like the original ones become public domain, don't they? Like at some
Well,
point,
Well, yeah.
if they
Well, but
uh,
that's not going to happen for until like 2077 or
yeah, it's
whatever.
not, it's not on the near term horizon, but like they have been dealing with that reality as like a whole, as a company dealing with Mickey and dealing with a lot of their properties, and they spent a lot of money for that property, and I feel like they've created a lot of new IP around the lore that the Star Wars trilogy establishes, and it's just like I don't think that the fact that they would have to continue to create new done versions of older properties is actually I don't see that as a flaw. I see that as a feature. Like, like I see that as in a highly competitive content environment.
I'm not saying it's
I
a flaw, I'm just saying it's something that they probably wouldn't do is remake the old ones. I'm not
Yeah,
saying it's, like, morally bad or something like that.
oh yeah, no, I hear that. I don't see it as morally bad either. I'm just saying I don't think you were trying to say that. I just think that like I would see that as a reason for them to make these movies just because like now it's all about attention, and as other people, smaller creators get to the capability, continue within the next 5 years, continue to get to a capability level that they could make a feature film that looks as good as something that Disney can do, then like like they're gonna leverage whatever they got. They're gonna leverage whatever they got to make whatever content they can to pull people into their platform to spend money, or else that system doesn't work anymore. Like, I don't
What
see it lasting much more than 5 to 10 years before they make a film, and I wouldn't be surprised if they announce it in the next 3 years.
Wait, I'm sorry, just so I understand, you think they are going to remake the original trilogy within the next 5 to 10 years? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, I think they're gonna remake it within the next 5 to 10 years, and I would not be surprised if they announced that they're gonna do that within the next 3 years.
I don't think they're gonna
That
do that.
that is a
But,
bold prediction.
yeah, it's a very bold
So
prediction because they still have a lot of other things in the pipeline before they even get to that. Culturally speaking, there's a lot of things attached to the original trilogy. It's not just cinema significance. It's also John Williams. It's also the star-making movie for Harrison Ford. Um, it's a lot of these things. And so I feel like giving the most the most leniency for them to redo it that I think that they will probably do is to keep doing special editions of those movies where they make things look better digitally. But I don't think they would want to replace the Harrison Ford. I don't think they would want to replace James Earl Jones or John Williams' music and all that stuff. And so I feel like if they were to remake it in the future, those are big, big shoes to fill. It's like the same reason why people don't remake Wizard of Oz, because it's like you have to all of a sudden have a new Judy Garland singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And it's
Well,
like
though
that's some
they have remade The Wizard of Oz a few times, like that
well,
story,
I'm
though.
the Wiz but like but people see that as like something different from people didn't see that as like this is uh, the replacement of the Wizard of Oz. Like people just saw it as like another thing, you know?
Right. Well, I think in this case, to what you're saying, John, like, I don't think you can. I mean, even going along with the scenario that Bracey just threw out there, where, they remake them in some fashion in the next 5 to 10 years, like, I don't think there's any scenario where they're talking about, like, deleting or erasing the original versions of the films. I use original
Mhm.
versions loosely, in the form that they
Yeah.
exist
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
now. The one interesting thing is the pains they have gone to in the new stuff. Like, they have Harrison Ford in The Force Awakens. They have recreated Mark Hamill's likeness for the character to appear in The Mandalorian. So, like, they would have to deal with the fact that in this new media that they are, like, trying to create within this, consistent interconnected universe that they've created. Like, they've now made it so, like, Luke Skywalker looks like Mark Hamill circa 1980 whatever, right?
Uh, going to the Wizard of Oz thing, I think something that the Wizard of Oz and here's a sound clip. I think something that the Wizard of Oz and the DC universe have in common is that they're based off of uh they're based off of written material that weren't movies beforehand. So like them going
Right.
to the source is going back to something else. Star Wars going back to the source is going back to their own movie timeline.
Right.
So I feel like that inherently makes it different because it makes it a little bit more special compared to like, oh well, Batman's a comic book, so we can just keep like we'll just keep making Batman like James Bond, whatever. But I feel like with Star Wars, it's harder to do that, you know?
Well, there is this idea that, like, film is unique because it renders reality so convincingly that, like, what you see in a movie, that's the way it, quote unquote, really happened, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That I think when the text originates in another form that's not a movie, like you were
In your
saying,
head.
like a novel or like a comic book
Hmm.
or like a stage production or whatever, because of the nature of those media, there is
Exactly.
no that's the way it happened, right?
Even with Lord of the Rings, because not everyone pictured Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn before they saw the movie. But then everyone pictures Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker.
I think this is a special case. Yeah, but so there's an interesting question there, how to deal with the
Mhm.
fact that the original source material was created in that medium that is, quote unquote, really how it happened, right? Like, and the fact that like the sequels and all the stuff, the new stuff that they're putting out that is set in that period of time in the fictional universe, like they are using AI and CG to recreate Mark Hamill at a certain age,
Right.
like to be Luke Skywalker. Like I think after the Obi-Wan show was when I was reading a lot of these ideas of like, in 10 years or so, like these kids are going to be the right age, so they should just remake Star Wars and have Ewan McGregor, he'll be the right age
He'll be
to
Alec
play.
Guinness.
Yeah, so it's like,
Yeah.
why not? I think that's where a lot of this started,
Um,
but you still encounter that problem though, where Luke
But it's not a
Skywalker is
problem.
talking.
well,
But it's not.
I
I
think
don't think
there's a
it's a
way
problem.
to between our differing opinions. I think there's a way for us to have our cake and to eat it too, because there's actually a precedent for this, which is J.J. Abrams' Star Trek, because they recognize in those movies that the Kirk shit with William Shatner, the Kirk shit, the William Shatner television series and those original movies happened. And then because of a time divergence or whatever, uh, they were able to soft reboot it with a younger cast and then make their own Star Trek movies. But Leonard Nimoy was like the connecting thing. So I feel like, uh, and that's another thing that was made with TV and movies. In our heads, we had Leonard Nimoy, William Shatner, George Takei, and I feel like Star Wars, if they were to make new movies with these characters, besides digitally just recreating Harrison Ford long after he's dead, is maybe they would just do something like that, where it's like an alternative take as to like, well, what if this happened instead of that happening, and like have it just be kind of like the what do they call it, like the Kelvin universe or something. But like, I wouldn't be surprised if they do some sort of like ancillary thing like that. Maybe start it off as like a TV show and then make it into a movie or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with Bracey. I don't think it matters that they don't look exactly the same. And I also think like, that specific example of the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, like the only reason that they had Leonard Nimoy there, I think, was to placate, a certain kind of Star Trek fan.
Yeah. And
Uh,
there's a certain type of Star Wars fan too that would, if they found out that they're remaking the original
Yeah,
trilogy, they would light the world on fire. And so like it's just like we've already seen them react. Like we've already seen Rise of Skywalker as a reaction movie, I feel like to an extent. So I feel like, and we've already seen them shut down movies after Solo underperformed. So that they do take fan reaction seriously, right or wrong. Not saying
wait,
they
sorry, you're
should.
saying you're
I'm saying
saying that.
I'm saying Disney, Lucasfilm, they do react to fan reactions. So when fans are wigging out, like Disney, money wise, like if we want to go the cynical route, they want to make money above all things.
No,
I
that's not
don't
the
think they would.
cynical route. I mean,
I'm just saying,
that's what's
like
driving all of this. Yeah.
sure. But I'm just saying, like, there would be a huge outrage about them recreating the original trilogy that goes beyond racism and sexism and all that stuff. I'm talking like there's a lot of people out there who would be like, fuck no about that. And so if they were to do it, I feel like it'll be like very, very far in the future if they were to even consider it.
Well, I mean, I think there's an equation, right? Like, how many of those fans are the ones who you're marketing to primarily
Sure.
versus how many? It's like, what's the largest group of fans that would vibe with something like that, right?
Well, there's
Like
also
in
the
my mind,
filmmaker culture too. Like how many directors and actors would sign on to that? Like
Enough,
that's
more than enough. If
there,
they
I mean,
announce
like
it, I do not see that ever being a thing that like oh they're remaking Star Wars. Oh no, I'm too good for that. Like
well, It
who's not
it
gonna
might not even
jump on with
necessarily be
that?
like a too good thing as much as like a too scared thing, because that's like big fucking shoes to fill. It's not like you're remaking Stand By Me, you know? It's like you're remaking like a cultural phenomenon, and it's like, "Oh, we're remaking the Beatles." It's like, "Whoa, who's gonna be the new Beatles?" It's like those are huge shoes to fill.
well, but they've kind of already done it though. Like, there are three actors that well, I mean, four actors. Like, they have a Luke, they have a Leia, they have an Obi-Wan, they have a Han Solo. So, assuming the young actors who played Luke and Leia, I know we didn't really see Luke that much in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, but like presuming in 10 years he's still an actor and he's still up for it, like they've kind of already done that. Like they've like softened the ground for
But
that.
they
So
weren't
so
trying to remake something that they were like, no one saw 10-year-old Leia or Luke. No one saw uh the origin. And by the way, like one of the reasons why Solo underperformed is because the actor who played Alden Ehrenreich, is that how you say his last name? But
Aaron Reich, I think.
yeah, something like that. Yeah, he was good. He was.
Yeah.
I thought he did a fantastic job. But he was really close to the same age as Han Solo and A New Hope. So people were like, like it was harder for them to swallow that pill. So it didn't
Ah,
like there was still a reaction to that movie. It kind of underperformed. We could also say that it came out 6 months after The Last Jedi and all that stuff. Whereas like a 10-year-old Luke and Leia is an easier pill to swallow because it's like, oh yeah, like they can't replicate those guys. They can't because they're 10 years old. So
yeah, I
there's no
mean,
pressure on them.
I suppose,
Like,
but
there's no
like,
pressure on Jake Lloyd to be Darth Vader when he's 10 years old, you know?
well, I mean,
But
first
there
off,
but
I
there
don't know
was.
that.
Well,
Yeah,
that was a reaction to the movie, but it was like but as like a as an actor, like, no one expected a 10-year-old boy to be 6'5" Darth Vader in a suit, James Earl Jones. They were just like that was a reaction to the movie and whatever, but, like, you know what I'm trying to say? There was pressure
Yeah,
on Ewan
yeah, no,
McGregor maybe to get closer to Alec Guinness more than there were, like, a child to
But
be like
can I throw a
Leia.
quick scenario out? Like,
Mhm.
can we say like just imagine 5 years, a 5 year run, and we have more successful Mandalorian and whatever the other shows are. Ahsoka's out. Like, they brought in a whole new generation of people, and they look because they've got the straight up data of the streams. Most people aren't looking at the original trilogy, and they know that they can remake the original trilogy for X amount of money and get a significant return on their investment for remaking it, and they would reinvigorate a whole new generation and make them feel like they're part of the conversation in a way that this new generation doesn't. Like, I feel like if they get to the numbers, the wood for me is completely a numbers game.
yeah,
If they can calculate it
Yeah.
and they see that that opportunity exists, then I don't see any reason that they wouldn't do it, apart from it could damage something. But even in there, I feel like that will fall out the further out on that 10-year
Well,
horizon
I
that we go.
I feel like in that situation, what they would do is they would just make new adventures with those original characters, and then making those original characters, or making those original movies, stories with those original characters, would then create the curiosity for those kids to go back and watch the original ones. So it's cheaper in a way to like they will make more money off the original trilogy by just having them rewatch it and stream it, and then they would make stupid money with the new movies of like new with new adventures because with the new adventures that guarantees everyone's going to watch it compared to just like uh kids who you know what I'm trying to say like
yeah.
I think every fan across the board would be up for a new adventure with Han, Luke, and Leia that had nothing to do with the original trilogy. Compared, and then if they're curious, they would just go back and watch the original trilogy, thus upping the revenue and streams for the original movies.
I think
If
they
that
would do
makes
the
Yeah, I
any
same
sense.
mean,
with anyone.
But they're not
I think it.
concentrated on the old characters. That's why they don't. That's probably why the kids aren't going back and watching them. They would probably make more stuff with the original characters, making them go back.
No, I think it depends. Like I'm with Bracey. They would if the numbers say that it makes sense for them to. The question in my mind is like, will the numbers ever make sense for them to? And I'm actually encouraged, going back to the post that the 14-year-old made, that he went and he engaged with this movie that was made 30 years before he was born, and he was like, what, like, hey, like this was really fun, like this movie is underrated. I guess he has a perception that Star Wars fans of his cohort don't really watch the original trilogy, or at least the original Star Wars. I don't know about the original trilogy. So it does make me question how far out that equation is going to tip over into, like, yeah, like we should remake the original trilogy, as long as there are young fans who go and seek out the original movie and still get a satisfying experience from it. Now, that said, I think we all have the experience of growing up as kids and maybe having a harder time with, say, a movie or a TV show that was in black and white, right? Or like something less accessible because of the presentation and the style of filmmaking. Like to make a comparison to Doctor Who, which I have a bad habit of doing far too often on this ostensibly Star Wars podcast.
How dare you?
But like most of classic Doctor Who was made, in a method of making TV that had far more to do with a theatrical stage performance tradition with like a camera sort of pointed at it than, cinematic language. And for a lot of people who weren't around for when that style of TV was in vogue, it can be very hard to get into the show because it quote unquote like looks fake or looks cheap when they aren't on the wavelength of like this isn't supposed to look real.
Right.
But what I'm trying to get at is that like as long as those films are still accessible, someone who didn't grow up in that time or didn't grow up in the 20th century, frankly, as long as kids of the 21st century are able to watch it and most of them are able to sit through it and appreciate it for what it is, I don't know that they will go the route of completely remaking those stories. Now, if
Yeah.
they were to, I could see them like they've even tried this. Like I forget what it's called, but there was a YouTube series, an animated YouTube series, Galaxy of Heroes, I think it was called, where they animated key moments from the George Lucas six, like the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy,
I think
that
in the sequels too, they did it.
yeah, I think you're right. That were
Yeah.
specifically aimed at younger children who maybe wouldn't sit through, a 2-hour movie that was made 30 years ago. So I could very easily see them like maybe remaking all of the Skywalker movies as like animated films or something. Or I could also see them, making a TV limited series of the events of the original trilogy from another point of view.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of in line what I was saying before. Like, it would just be a different thing if they were to go back to the original characters.
Because like I do think there is this kind of extra challenge where you are on the one hand saying like with the sequels and the Mandalorian, like Han Solo always looked like Harrison Ford and Luke Skywalker has always, looked like Mark Hamill, where, it has that extra challenge of the originating source material is from this medium where the actors are inseparable from the characters, right? I mean, even though
At,
they
at
have
least,
they have recast Han Solo and Obi-Wan
uh,
before, one successfully and one,
yeah,
arguably
but
less so.
I think the reason why, and kind of going with the Luke and Leia thing with the kids, the reason why the Obi-Wan recasting was successful is because it did take place 30 years prior, so he wouldn't look like an old man, he would look like a young man, and I feel like with the reason why Solo, yet again, as great as I thought he was in that movie, I mean that I feel like is an underrated movie, but like uh
I agree with that.
he was only like 5 years younger than his character in A New Hope, so that's why people were like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa." That's like, that's why people were more hesitant to it because he was supposed to be much closer in age, uh, to what Harrison Ford was, and so, like, it would've been different if it were, like, showing, like, a 12-year-old Han Solo or something like that.
We're
But,
also forgetting Lando, who I think, most people would agree, like, they really wanted to see more of Donald Glover in that
you
for
know,
sure.
to take that off on a tangent right now, I wonder. I mean, Billy D. Williams is even older than Harrison Ford. So to play a younger Lando, there's more of an age gap. But on top of that, like, I feel like when Billy D. Williams was cast as Lando, he was like fucking Billy D. Williams.
Right,
And like he had like people knew who he was. Like nobody knew who Harrison Ford was. He was Han Solo. And
right.
then he became Indiana Jones. So I feel like it was a bit easier for it's like when it's like, I don't know, like if they were to do like a young like Mace Windu. It's like Samuel L. Jackson was like very popular before he became Mace Windu. So like his the image of Mace Windu is more associated with Samuel L. Jackson, and maybe the image of Lando is more associated with uh Billy D. Williams. I don't know if it's vice versa or whatever, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like the actor, I think, might have outshone the role as compared to the role outshining the actor.
I
And
I feel
so
like I feel like
there's
those
more leeway with that.
I feel like the argument though with like the age, and do they match the person, or they don't match because of the, like, it only matters when we're talking about the old guard. Like, it only matters when you're talking about the people who, uh
Mm,
their 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 image of the Star Wars universe is grafted to the original cast and how that was presented. However, I don't think Disney sees the old guard as the future of the Star Wars IP. Like, I don't see them thinking like, "Oh, we have to continue to appease them as we move forward and we're making our plans," because ultimately, that's not where their growth opportunity even is.
I agree
And
with
that's
that.
where I see the real reason why they would refresh the original Star Wars movies, whether that's as a movie or whether that's a movie directly to the Disney Plus platform, is because they care more than anything to McDonald'sify a Star Wars fan. They want to get them in early, and there's no accessibility to those movies. Some of us will find it. Some kids, some cool kids will like discover it, but I do not think it is at the level that would be
Well,
like indoctrinating essentially people into the Star Wars
I
fandom.
think I think it's like a catch-22 thing where, because I think it has something to do with what Josh was saying earlier, where it's like, if you wanna get people on board with those stories and those characters, that's going to take a certain amount of, effort and interest on the viewer. So, I don't think anyone who's actually curious about those characters, who wants to see those stories, like, well, maybe there's some of them, but, like, I don't know. I don't think necessarily they would go back and then not watch them because they're old. I think more likely, maybe with what you're talking about, these characters might not even they might not even be in people's heads. With, like, certain people, when they think of Star Wars, they probably think of Mando and Grogu and Ahsoka and whatever, and so, like, it's kind of, like, irrelevant. So if they never go back and watch, stories with Luke Skywalker or the original movies with Luke and Han and all of them, they don't care because 'cause they're still they can make new Star Wars movies with Greg and Jeff, and they will love Greg and Jeff. So, like, it doesn't matter. They're still gonna be making a shit ton of money on the new movies with new characters, if even if people never even heard of Han Solo. And then the people
Yeah,
that are like, "Oh, I actually heard about this Darth Vader, Han Solo, Luke Skywalker thing." If they already have that interest and they wanna seek it out, they'll just go back and watch it. That's the way I
yeah.
kinda see it.
I think you're right on the money, Bracey, in terms of the McDonald'sification or whatever of Star Wars as like a lifestyle that like you want to get them young. And I think, there are already several starting points already beyond the original trilogy. Like there were, I mean, the prequels certainly were one, the Clone Wars, Rebels sort of Filoniverse of it all. Um,
Sequels, TV
the
shows.
sequels, which, in the quote unquote Filoniverse is even more accessible, with Mando and the Ahsoka show. I think that's going to make a lot of people who maybe were either too old or too young to watch Clone Wars. I think the Ahsoka show will make a lot of people go back and check out, like, even Clone Wars, which, like, we're forgetting is also a pretty old show at this point.
Yeah, it's almost like 20 years old at this point.
Uh, N no, it's like 2007 to, like,
Oh,
2000.
I'm thinking of the 2D cartoon that came out, like, in 2005 or 2004, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I think there are already a lot of starting points, and I think you're right, Bracy, like, they are the old guard, as it were, of which I guess we are
We're
part,
the old
even though,
guard,
like,
buddies. We're the old guards.
well
Mhm.
well,
I'm
like well, frankly, as far as Disney is concerned, I think, you said, Bracy, like, they definitely feel a need to kind of appease a certain kind of fan. I think they're frankly just waiting for us to die, so that they don't have to worry about stepping on certain landmines, culturally speaking.
And
Um,
maybe that might give them more of an incentive to get away from the Skywalkers, for fuck's sake, after we all die.
Well, I
And
think they're
then just
doing that. I think they're doing that
more
already. I
movies
think
and
they're
story.
actively
They
making
are.
that effort to spread out the universe and fill out
Yeah.
into those other characters.
Which
they
kinda gives them
absolutely are.
more ammunition to just make new stuff and never go don't go back to the old shit, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think through this conversation, I'm kind of talking myself to the position that Star Wars that Disney would definitely remake it if the numbers were there, but I don't think they're going to. I think is where I'm coming down on this. And if they do, I think it'll be in a form where it's not just like a straight up one to one. Here's a movie that's episode 4. Here's a movie that's episode 5. Here's a movie that's episode 6. I think it would like be something in the vein of like a limited series where it's got like a spin on it or like an animated thing. It's not like a one to one correlation. I think that's where I'm landing on it.
Here's how I would do it. I would,
Let's
I
go.
would, I would totally look at like if we were gonna make Star Wars first principles today and give it the like Andor plus treatment. Like we really
Mm.
want to lean into this um, and make it like the staple of like what we think Star Wars could be, and represent and show this world that's expansive, this galaxy, and really set the stage. Like I would, I would play out the TV shows, spread us get more properties out there, people who are invested in other areas of the Star Wars universe. In 5 years, 5 to 7 years, I would take the new technology that allows me to use all the old characters if I want to, and just remake them, but like really, really well done. And then those become like the they make the Star Wars staple pack, uh, and you can go back and see the originals if you want to, but I feel like that would reinvigorate a lot more attention from the younger crowd to understand what like the core mythology was. But then what would really be happening is that's actually just like it's a small portion of what's going on in the world, but they allow accessibility to these other stories that are just like going to be falling off the radar the more and more we move forward.
So you're talking about remaking the movies that way, like with like
Yeah.
The Andor verve, or whatever you want to call it, like the Andor approach.
Like, yeah, the Andor approach really tying it into other elements that just weren't in the original, adding inclusivity in ways that, like, other people do not feel a part of the story in this
Yeah.
universe, and they don't feel
Well,
like it's actually a
yeah.
wider galaxy.
Well, like, one of the things that I heard somebody say on another podcast, they were talking about Andor, and they were like, "This is clearly the most like well realized, well acted, well written, well made show like Star Wars thing I have ever seen." Except it's not for kids, and that makes me a little bit sad, right? That really, I think, articulated the only critique that I could level at Andor in any way would be that. And like, how integral is that to Star Wars that it be accessible to kids? And, if you do go back to first principles, like that was George Lucas's intention, right? To create like a mythological framework to impart lessons about life and society and how to live and interact with society for kids, right?
Yeah.
So when you say like remake it and give it the Andor treatment, I don't know that would work necessarily, because if the intention is to get them young, I think you would have to make. I think it's more likely we get something closer to the like humor of like the Last Jedi, for example, where
Yeah,
it's like more kid friendly, like either the Last Jedi or like the Phantom Menace, frankly.
well, I it's funny you mention all this because I remember watching Andor and thinking about how we have always said before how like every show is kind of like a different facet of what Star Wars is, like the serial, the spaghetti western, the
Yeah.
fantasy, the whatever. Um, Watching Andor, I had that same thought. I was like, this isn't for kids. And I did think that like the mantra of Star Wars was always like, it's for kids. So it was something that made me think like, um, it was a bit ironic because I think I remember when they were making Solo, when they fired the original directors, I think a big problem that we all kind of assumed, but I think given quotes from like Lawrence Kasdan and stuff like that, was that they were saying like Han Solo is not funny. Like, don't try to make like it almost like I think we all kind of inferred that maybe they're trying to make it too much of a comedy or whatever. I don't know. I could be totally wrong. but like it was like a vibe thing and it wasn't working. And I feel like Andor is a same extreme vibe change that works because it's done really well, you know, and they take it very seriously. So I feel like Andor kind of opens up the door of like thematically speaking, who is Star Wars for? What are the audiences like? Are they going to make like a Star Wars slapstick comedy? Are they going to make like a Star Wars horror movie? Are they going to make like a Star Wars romantic comedy? Like, it's just all these things where it's just like Andor kind of opens up those doors of possibilities that like should Star Wars go down those routes or not? Because who is the audience and why are they making these movies?
I
And
feel
it's
like
I
we've landed right in the should portion of our conversation. Should
yes, yes,
they
now,
make
now,
make
now we're
the
into question number two over an
yeah.
hour into the podcast. Should they
yes.
do this? It's even like,
Well,
should they have even made Andor the way that they made it? It's like,
Yes.
I
well,
think, well, in my opinion, as a
Yeah.
consumer and as what I want to see as a 40-year-old, fuck yeah. But like at the same time, it's like these things are going to go like way over kids' heads,
yeah,
and
but
they're
that's
not going to
fine. Yeah,
understand.
but
But it's like that I'm totally fine with it, but I'm just saying like it's like a philosophical sort of thing of like how far down are you gonna have like a West Wing Star Wars? Like how far down the line are you gonna go, you know?
so you can have the Andor flavor of Star Wars as long as you have all the other ones, right? Like
Truth.
again, it's like making customers for life, right? So you need something for every age group, every demographic. So yeah, so the should, right? I
Mhm.
think I would not like to see the original trilogy remade. I would be very intrigued, again, like to talk about movies and remakes in general. The only reason to remake a movie is if you're introducing something new. It's like you have a new thing to say about the material or a new spin on it. Going to what Bracey was saying, like I'd be very interested and intrigued to see a remake of, say, starting with A New Hope, where the main character was Leia and we were following her, and the other, your twin brother, was Luke, right? I would also be very interested in, friend of the podcast, Jeff Koenig, wrote this on his social media, and my head was going somewhere similar. Watching the Obi-Wan Kenobi series made me realize that was sort of an alternate universe episode 4 of the main saga. Like that series followed up Revenge of the Sith more than the original Star Wars is a follow-up to Revenge of the Sith. Like you want to see when Obi-Wan finds out that Anakin is Vader, and you want to see them confront each other again. And like what we get of that in Star Wars, like if you watch them in chronological order, it's like the emphasis is not where you feel like it should be. So
Yeah.
so Jeff was he was saying like you should remake it and have it be through the eyes of Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? Like I think there are ways to do the source material with a different spin, a different emphasis, and I would be intrigued to see that.
So, when I was saying getting them young, like, the way I'm seeing this is in 10 years, like, you could look at, the new journey that they started for people with Mandalorian. I think they started, bringing people in at, at the end of 2019. It's like that was the beginning of The Mandalorian, the TV series version of Star Wars, and I feel like at the end of 10 years, you're gonna have this generation of people who have gotten to the point that they could be leaned into something like Andor more, and I feel like that's actually why I like, when I'm thinking of the original stories being redone, it is specifically to pull in the kids who started right now and have been going through the series and the TV shows and haven't really been interested in the movies so much as they are interested in all the other Star Wars universe properties that are coming out, and that would be the perfect way to bring them in young, but young, I'm talking 20. Like, I'm talking like the
Mhm.
beginning of the funnel of somebody who's gonna be spending their money on Disney for the next 30 to 40 to 50 years, and that being the launching point of it's like more of a gift for this group that's kind of going through the the factory floor right now. So that's kind of what I where I was seeing that, like, getting them young is more
Mhm.
like getting them young into the more deeper movie fandom kind of approach.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that because I think for all the same reasons, those same people, when they get to that age, they'll just go back and watch the old movies. And I had a thought while you were saying that, which is like they're going to be having the same conversation as to like, are they going to remake the prequels? Oh, they fucking can't do that. Like they're going to be having like a conversation about it,
Well, that
and
conversation's
like,
been happening, I think, since 1999.
well, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm talking about like the kids who grew
I
up
know, I
like
know,
obsessed
I
with
know, I
Hayden
know.
Christensen as Anakin, and like all these
Yeah.
people that like they're gonna be having the same conversation, and then like I feel like when you get down to that point where a fan is gonna be watching this stuff for decades, that's a level of interest that's gonna make them want to go back. As a young kid watching movies, I didn't know The Wizard of Oz was an old movie. I didn't know Mary Poppins was an old movie. They were just movies, you know? And then as I got older, I was like, oh, yeah, that's from like 1939. I had like back in 1986, I had no idea, you know? I
Yeah,
wasn't
but
thinking.
dude, this generation of kids are so much more media literate than we were. Like, they're so much more media
Sure.
literate on so many different facets that like it's not the same thing. It's
I
like
think you
it's like
sit
us
down.
looking back for it's like us looking at
Yeah.
the vaudeville era and
Right.
trying to be
I
entertained.
hear
Like
that point.
like
I hear that point.
that's it's a huge difference now.
I still maintain though that if you have enough interest and enough dedication to something that you're actually curious about the old thing, you'll just go back and see it.
No, that's
But
true, and again, it just depends on, I mean, it's a numbers game. It depends on,
yeah, what's
like,
worth
is
it for them
that
with the bank? Uh,
yeah, and, like, we don't know how, like, what the prevailing, like, what the vast majority of that age group is going
mm,
to be doing, I think is the
uh,
question.
and Josh, when you were talking about the Obi-Wan shows more of a follow-up to Revenge of the Sith, I feel like the TV shows are kind of like that for Return of the Jedi compared to The Force Awakens. Like The
Mm,
Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett are direct sequels to Return of the Jedi
yeah.
compared to The Force Awakens. Like I feel like they're kind of mirroring each other in that sense.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So my should comes down to I feel like after this conversation, I don't believe they should unless they're going back and they're making 1 through 6.
Agree,
I think
agree.
that's I
Oh,
don't think they should
you
go
you mean
back
like
and
from
start.
Phantom Menace to Return of the
Yeah.
Jedi?
I think, like, if they go back, if they're like, "We're gonna do this," then I think they should do it because I think, like, with all the whining, I think there'll be a lot less whining. Because,
Why?
like, people will be like, "Oh, I'm losing the original trilogy, but I'm gaining, like, a more refined, prequels," and then, likewise, the people who are like, "Oh, I can't believe the prequels they're making," but they're like, "Oh, but, like, I've been waiting for
Yeah.
them to redo the originals."
That's
If they
And
actually
then
made it
that's
like
a very good point.
if they made it like say like a one shot sort of mini series for television the way they do Andor or something like that, like you were saying before, where it's like hour-long episodes and they made it like a 12 whatever episode, 15 episode season. You think they might do it that way because that way it won't be the movies. It would just be like I don't know what. But even then, like I'm not even sure if they would do that
oh,
unless they invent a new character to tell the same stories in different perspective. Like it's just
I
like
think
I think when the kids get old enough, they're gonna probably want to go back and watch the old stuff anyway.
I think it all depends on their market research,
Yeah.
and I think it all depends on, things we don't know about, how we're going to be consuming media and what is going to resonate with generations younger than us. Like the interesting thing I'm, realizing now is like we are the wrong people to be having this conversation because, we're talking about stuff that's not specifically not for us. It's not targeted at us.
If you really want to get conceptual, we're even thinking about ways of like watching the ways we watch movies and consume media now. The ways we consume media in the future could be far different. So like they might be making new things for things like beyond virtual reality, beyond things where you are an active participant. Like there are certain things that like we cannot predict because they haven't been invented yet. So like you know what I'm trying to say.
Here, son, here's a pill. This is Star Wars.
Wow.
You want your blue pill or your red pill? One's the prequels, one's the original trilogy. what about the sequel thing? I heard about a sequel. Oh, you don't
No,
even want to touch that shit.
no, no, no,
That
no, no.
that shit will fuck you up.
So it wasn't something that I was going to throw into the mix of everything that we were already talking about, but I do believe, and that is also why I kind of give that time horizon. I do believe that in the not too distant future, the medium in which this is delivered on is going to be something that is a little bit more custom tailored in ways that like tailoring it to the end the audience member that is viewing it. And I don't think with the access to AI and a real-time real-time rendering capabilities, that wouldn't be part of the storytelling where like there are elements that are identified that could better be tailored to the person that is watching it, that will get them more invested in the story without actually affecting the core story elements. And like I feel like that's
Well,
whatever
at
that
that
comes out
point
as is going to be the
It's
at
a
that
future.
Banders
point, to
the
me to me
Bandersnatch. It's Star Wars Bandersnatch,
Yeah.
yeah,
and you can watch it horizontally or vertically.
maybe backwards. To me, that's not even like a conversation of them remaking the movies as much as like it's just a new thing, like
Yeah,
entirely. That's
yeah. I
like
mean, you
you
can.
can play like the original trilogy on Super Nintendo. That's like a totally different thing. To me, what we're talking about now is like that's not even like a that's just like a whole thing. That's like
Yeah.
everyone will do
Well,
that for every single thing. If you can
yeah.
actually like be actually experiencing it, that's like a whole new
Oh, but
boundary
I'm not even talking about it. I'm
frontier.
even talking about just watching it as a 2D element. They can take elements from the model, from your data, from what you watch, and they can apply that to how they're real
But
time generating
sure,
and you're
but
watching it as a film. I feel
but to
like
me,
that
that's
is
still like
likely what
a
it's going to be.
but I still think that's kind of like a new thing anyway because I think like given the parameters of everyone seeing the same product, old school, the way that we watch a movie now, I don't necessarily think they're gonna go back to that. But if they're involving like breaking the fourth wall and making it more like catered to the individual, then it's like fucking everyone will do that. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, I mean, yeah, like, I think here we're getting to a question that is kind of another question about, like, what is the form we're gonna be consuming media generally.
Mm,
And the one thing that I will say in regards to, the customization of the experience for the viewer or the end user or however you wanna term it, is that while I do think that is a horizon that will open up for storytelling. I also do think that is not a replacement. I think
mhm,
there will always be sort of a desire to be told a story that is not a bespoke or a participatory experience, right? So I think what you're talking about, Bracey, and I could be wrong, but I think that what you're talking about is a form of media, a form of storytelling that I don't think will replace the one-way mode of communication that sort of film and TV represents right now. Like I don't think it'll be a replacement for that. I think it'll be something that is another option that will compete for our attention and eyeballs along with film and TV. I mean,
mm.
that's my take on it.
I just asked Chat GPT to summarize the original Star Wars movie as a haiku.
Oh my god, okay.
A young Jedi rises with droids and princess in tow. Dark Lord he defeats.
That's not
Wonderful. That's
wrong.
And I was just using it because I was like, I honestly, I do believe there is going to be that like weird crossover period, but like as soon as people buy it, as soon as people are actually willing to put their attention on it, I think that's when they make that shift. And if it, I think the moment it starts to be presented as an option right next to a Star Wars movie or a show, I feel like your like our outside perspective of what is generating that movie doesn't really matter at that point because like it's literally going to be in the same place as the original Star Wars film. It one might be a little interactive in a way that's like passive interactivity. It's taking elements of your model, but I can see arguments that it isn't the same thing, but I also very at the very core It's like it doesn't matter if we as consumers act the same way. If we as consumers act
Yes,
something.
right. No, I agree with you. What I'm saying is that I don't think that for consumers, that will be the thing that they would rather do every single time.
Hmm.
Oh,
I think, and also too, if you
I don't
want to
know.
have if the ability to like talk about things with everybody, like it's a bit weird because no one's going to be able to talk about what you're talking about because it's like
Yeah, I mean, that's
it's
another
like
thing
talking
also.
about your like, oh, I had a dream, you had a dream, let's talk about our dreams. It's like it's not the same. Like you
Aren't we
can't.
dealing with that right now though? Isn't
A
that
little
the isn't that the whole point? Like they're like the media fractioning, like people aren't able to talk about the
I
same
don't think
stuff? Except for the fact that we have a Star Wars podcast, and obviously there's
yeah, I
people,
was
and
gonna say
we're grateful
we're
for
talking.
everybody who's taking the time to listen to us now.
well, yeah,
But we're all consuming different media, but it's still possible to see the same exact media. Like if you're
yeah,
talking
there's
about
still
like
a
if you're talking about like a song or a movie or a show or literally anything, if you see it, you see it, and then if somebody else sees it, they see it. They might have different thoughts on it. But if you have media that's giving you a different product by just because you as an individual with an algorithm and feature technology, whatever, you wouldn't be able to talk about it in the same sense as to like we've all seen the same movie, we all know what we're talking about. So that, culturally speaking, I think is a reason why it will never fully replace the way that we watch stuff now. Like
um
books with paper still exist, stuff like that.
right. No, I mean, that's a good point. It's like, the novel still exists as a form of entertainment. It's not
Mhm.
the dominant form of entertainment that it was in the 19th century.
Right.
I mean, or even the 20th century, frankly. But yet it still exists, and there are still people who seek it out and who appreciate that form for what it does well. Um, I am not embarrassed to say that I don't completely understand what it is we're talking about fully. Um, but
Well, the way that I interpret it is like if I'm watching a movie
no, no,
and
I know,
given what the
I know,
computer
I
thinks
know.
I
I,
like, they might recast someone with a different actor compared to the actor that you're seeing.
yes, yes,
Like,
exactly,
that's the way,
exactly.
and it's
Right,
like you
right.
can't talk about the
Yes,
movie if I saw it with Tom Hanks and you
no,
saw it with Tom Cruise. It's a different
right.
movie.
No, no, yeah. So, but it's
Like
just we're approaching a level of like hypothetical on hypothetical.
I know, I
We're
know.
approaching a level of abstraction where it's like I'm not sure I'm following the conversation 100%. That said, I think there's a distinction to be drawn that I believe will make the sort of dictatorial creator, viewer, reader straight line something that remains a viable source of artistic expression. Because I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that art, whether it's film, drama, the written word, music, I think it's about communicating human experience. It's about communicating ideas about human experience. And I think that while there is a place for the bespoke, algorithmically generated content, that is something that I think will be entertaining and will occupy your time. But ultimately, I think it's kind of empty calories because it's like when you try to read into it or you try to kind of understand on a deeper level, like what is the idea, what is the point of view that is
Mm.
trying to be imparted here, that there is no single human mind at work that is trying to communicate something to you
You're not showing
underneath
a
it
different
all.
point of view. You're just seeing your point of view in an echo chamber.
Yeah, well, I mean, not to say that like you wouldn't be able to read something into what you're being shown, but I'm saying that there is a level of engagement with a piece of art or with a text that goes beyond just the superficial of what
Mm.
you're being shown. Like you try to pick it apart, you try to understand why you are being told this thing in this way that I still think is a pleasure or a necessary function of art that is created by humans. And that's I think something, whether you articulate it in that way or not, I think that's something that we need and will continue to be a necessity. So I don't know that when we're talking about, say, Star Wars, the movie, I don't know that any form of of AI, VR experience will completely supplant the movie from 1977 that was the artistic vision of one man realized through the talents and the perspectives of many others around him. But that artistic vision, that intent to communicate something in a specific way to reach a specific audience with a specific intent, like that's something that I think is the animating force, I guess pun intended actually, that is at the heart of all Star Wars. So like you can have a Star Wars experience that is completely designed to push your particular buttons, but I think that that will never completely supplant, old-fashioned movies,
Sure.
novels.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree with that.
for the most part, I agree with that. I think what I'm speaking more is like translating the elements that don't necessarily communicate over the way that it was intended,
Mm,
and not changing the core story, but actually being able to understand what is being said and making it more accessible to other people.
mm,
As that technology
Oh,
becomes
well, that's
more and more
interesting.
available, that's going to be applied to our media, and even though it comes out in a very similar form, it's going to be something that is more and more tailored so more and more people can access.
Could you give me an
well,
example? Because I'm not exactly sure I'm following.
Yeah, so if the movie was originally shot in a way that's like highlighting characters in a certain landscape that like if somebody is colorblind, the way that it was shot doesn't really help that person see due to contrast issues, but then like it can in real time modify the film so the color correction and things like that itself is changed, and like that wasn't what the original creator had intended when they had color corrected the film and shot it and set everything up, but that real time modification allows somebody who is colorblind to actually enjoy the film in a way that they actually get all the elements the same way that we put captions there. No filmmaker, not no filmmaker, but most filmmakers aren't thinking of having captions as part of their film unless there's a part where they want to express somebody's opinion through captions. But that inevitably modifies the film from accessibility. And I think that capability is expanding, and we're going to see that expand and reach deeper into what we think of as the actual core meat of a film. And that's kind of what I'm saying is like that's that like we could you could go off into the VR and the immersive side as well, but I think even before that, there's levels of accessibility of expanding the universe for
mm,
people who don't necessarily have a perspective on it the way that we do, because it's there's a certain level of ableism that we have just kind of
sure.
taken for granted that allows that they can't even get to the point that we're at. So that was more what I was talking about.
Yeah, that's
Well, that's
interesting.
interesting. Um,
Um, we we both said literally the same thing at the same
yeah,
time. Uh,
Oh, you guys saw that there's a video going around of this new like AI replacement of the face, so people can dub in other languages and it matches with the mouth. That's another way that I feel like that's about to like
that's crazy.
completely
yeah, I've never
influence
even heard of that.
our cinema, and that's already happening now. And it's starting to find its way into movies, into like Netflix, like streaming services, because it's like it's such a big deal. You have this movie, you lose a lot of people who aren't willing to watch it with subtitles because it's harder. And now they're utilizing that tool to make it so they can customize it for each and every viewing audience
That's
It's
super
when it
interesting.
comes to
interesting.
language.
Uh, that's a very interesting application of the technology. Yeah, I'm starting to get what you're talking about.
I actually had a question to go back to the original quote being like, this is low key underrated. Basically, under the assumption that this movie is not what he assumed it would be because it was an old movie to him. Uh, do you have your own examples of a movie that you had an expectation of what it was going to be? And then like a classic that you just didn't see because you're like, oh yeah, like I know there's this old movie and like it's supposed to be pretty good, but you just avoided it. And then when you finally watched it, you're like, this is not what I expected it to be in a good way. I actually have a couple of examples, but I want to
Dead
hear what
Poet
you.
Society.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Because that movie is of our generation too. Like it came out when we were like 7 or 8 years old or something like that.
Yeah,
But
but I never it wasn't exactly, it wasn't a movie for me at the time that it
mhm,
was coming out, and then when I watched it, I was like, "This has all the markings of that time period,
mhm.
but
But
it's also really good." This is a
yeah,
really good movie.
yeah, it's like this is a solid movie.
I honestly can't think of an example where I saw something that had a reputation that wasn't what I expected. I do have a lot of examples that are coming to mind of, movies that I tried to engage with when I was younger, like in high school, that I knew
Mm,
were like quote unquote classics that I don't know I fully got for whatever reason. That now as an adult, I
mhm.
sit down and I watch it and it's like a completely different viewing experience. It's like a completely different thing where I'm like, oh, this is what that was. And I don't know if it's because
Yeah,
I didn't have the life experience or I didn't have I wasn't like as good at interacting with media that wasn't made for
you weren't
me
as
and my
literate back
sensibilities.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah. So I'm sure it's a combination of the two. It's being more literate and also like I am older and have more life experiences, so I can
yeah,
relate to more of the things that are in there and they're more meaningful to me.
sure.
Um,
That's cool.
but what are your examples?
Well, 2 movie I have examples for both of those things. 2 movies that I saw that I had totally different ideas of what they were, and they weren't those things, were Lawrence of Arabia and Saturday Night Fever. Lawrence of Arabia, I thought was gonna be like an Errol Flynn swashbuckling desert adventure, and it's not. It's like an anti-war movie, and it's like great. It's deep. It's amazing. And then Saturday Night Fever, I thought it was just like a John Travolta disco party movie, and it's not. It has a lot more to do with mean streets than anything else, and it's like really fucking dark and depressing. Yeah, like, and I was like, this movie is not what I thought. But when you think of Saturday Night Fever, you just think of the white suit, him pointing his finger up in the air, and like the Bee Gees, and the opening scene of him walking down the sidewalk eating pizza. You're like, yeah, I know what this movie's going to be, and you watch it and you're like, Jesus Christ, like this is like a dark fucking movie. And then it's not what I thought. And then to your point, Josh, uh I remember watching Eyes Wide Shut when it came out. Cause I was like 18 and or so. It came out. I think a senior in high school or something like that. I watched it and I was like, yeah, Stanley Kubrick, he's the best. Let's watch this movie. And I was like, yeah, this movie's weird. I think I know what's going on. Like, I guess they're, having marital problems and there's a weird orgy. And like, that was an interesting experience. And then I watched it in my 30s as a grown man in a committed adult relationship. And I was like, oh, fuck. like this movie, like, is totally different. And likewise, I just watched Saving Private Ryan, like maybe like a year or two ago again. I hadn't seen it since college. When we were in college, I was like, this is the craziest fucking war movie. And then as an adult, I was just crying through the whole movie because of the weight of the toll of the cost of war over everything. So I don't know. I just think it's interesting. Like different perspectives of like when we get older and then like thinking of like assuming what something's going to be. And then we actually see it and it's like not what we thought.
No, that's actually really interesting that you brought up Kubrick because several of the examples that I had in mind when I said what I said were Stanley Kubrick movies. I was thinking of
Mm.
2001: A Space Odyssey. I was thinking
Hmm.
of Doctor Strangelove. I was thinking
Hmm.
of, I mean, basically,
All
like,
of
yeah, like that's an example where it's not just me though. Like, I actually think like Stanley Kubrick's an example where a lot of people, most people, have that experience with a Stanley Kubrick movie where like it takes like two, three, four, five viewings to fully digest it. And that makes me think of a Guillermo del Toro quote that I just came across recently where he was like, make your weakness your strength.
mm,
And that's your style.
mm,
And he used the example of Stanley Kubrick where he was like, you know, you look at his earlier movies and they're like kind of stodgy and meticulous and like kind of lifeless. And what Kubrick did was he leaned into that and he made that his style, where like
mm.
that's how he sees things. And then like that becomes like a Stanley Kubrick movie. right?
And by leaning
I thought,
into it, you see the humanity in something that seems ostensibly very cold, like
yeah,
2001 or something
or
like that,
even
which
Eyes
is like,
Wide Shut,
or
frankly.
even Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah, exactly. Like it's a very cold stance on everything, but when you watch it, you feel uncomfortable, and you're just like,
Yeah,
oh, whoa, everything's like you're starting to do the work for the movie. You're projecting onto it.
yeah. I mean, Eyes Wide Shut is crazy because it's like, when it came out or the first time you watch it, it's a hard watch because like there's like a tension there where
Mhm.
it feels very cold and sterile, yet the subject matter is like so primal
Intimate.
and passionate and intimate. Anyway, this is not a Stanley Kubrick podcast,
No,
though.
well, I mean, like, I
No,
wonder
it kind
what,
of is.
like, going back to the dude who watched Star Wars and said it was low key underrated. I wonder what he thought Star Wars would be when he
Me
saw the
too.
original movie, and I
Yeah.
wonder if he thought it was going to be like some Humphrey Bogart movie to him or something. And I wonder what he got out of it. Did he get the same thing that we got out of it, or did he get something totally different out of it? I wonder if he saw it with our eyes now, or if he sees it in connection to all of like the canon that exists outside of those movies, you know? So I wonder what that is for him.
Yeah, I mean, I presume, and again, I reached out to him because I would love to put these questions to him, like, I mean, just out of curiosity.
Mm.
I presume he was reading it in the context of the canon that's already out there, and he probably assumed that like the special effects
Would be
wouldn't hold
shitty.
up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I
Mm.
presume. It's like, it's like if you're to watch, I don't know. I mean, I feel like now I'm pretty open to watch anything, and I can kind of engage with it on its own terms. But like, I mean, again, like there was a time where as a kid, black and white would be kind of a barrier for me.
Yeah.
Um,
For a lot of people.
Unless it was Laurel Hardy for me. Like I was a huge fan of Laurel and Hardy back in the day.
I mean, for me, like I liked I Love Lucy and the
uh,
Twilight Zone.
yeah, yeah.
I loved the Twilight Zone when I was a kid.
Subtitles are a very big barrier for a lot of people. Uh,
Well, anyway, I feel like we have gone through the pros and cons enough. To wrap it up, though, where do we fall on each of these questions? Will they and should they? Or would they and should they? John, would
uh,
they and should they remake Star Wars?
I'll do three of them because I'll include will. Uh, will they? Probably not. No, I don't think so. Would they? They would do literally anything for money. I think that's just the nature of Hollywood. Should they? No. I feel like as a piece of culture, as a piece of art, just leave it the way it is and just make new stuff and make new stuff that will reflect back onto that. So you can see the trajectory of the history of cinema and the history of our own art and culture. If you keep going back and redoing, changing history, you lose track as to why you're doing the things you're doing and how we got to where we are now. They need to have the breadcrumbs.
Well said. Bracey, would they, should they? You can answer it the way John did as well. Will they, would they, should they?
Okay, yeah, will they? Yeah, as I made the prediction, I'm pretty confident they will.
They're doing it right now.
Would they? Yeah, like assuming that like the numbers align and things make sense and should they? Um, yeah, absolutely because like I'm happy in knocking down this gatekeeping um that I feel like emerges from the sense that that we have to keep these things sacred. Stories are meant to grow and be retold, and like I feel like, yeah, I see only a brighter future in a world where we're retelling these stories and not uh, necessarily gatekeeping them.
It's funny
Very.
because it's like two different, totally different perspectives, and yet like I don't necessarily disagree with everything that you're saying. I think it's just like it's funny because I was talking about it as art, and you were talking about it as story, and it's like those are kind of two different things. I don't know. I just find it interesting.
Well, it's also interesting too because I don't disagree with what either one of you said, but I think there is. I don't know that you can separate form from the story. It's like, I mean, you can, but then it becomes something fundamentally different, which I think is the point that you're making, Gracie. It's like we can and should make it something new and different, and that only makes the original that much more special and unique because it was a rendering of that story in the way that it only could be and only will ever be.
Hmm.
So will they, would they, should they? Will they? Well, this is not so straightforward. I guess it depends on what you mean by remake. Like now that we've sort of busted it open,
We mean everything.
I
If you want to
don't
remake
think,
it as something totally new and different, then yeah, they probably will. But if you
yeah,
just want to remake like a standard movie, the way we
yeah,
know
like a
movies, I
120
think they
minute
will.
like theatrical film, I don't think they will. Would they? Yes, absolutely. Of course they would.
Mhm.
Should they? Not for me to say.
As a standalone movie, just a movie. I don't
No,
think
I
they
mean,
should. If they make a whole new, brand new thing, then like I don't know what is it. I might be curious. You know, like
like it's a tricky question because I'm a firm believer that you should be willing to engage with a text, be it a movie or whatever, in the way that it was originally, intended. Because I don't think you can separate the restrictions of the medium and the form that it is from the content. I think that influences the content. So I think there's value to, not making them inaccessible, Bracey, but I think there is value in, engaging with things on their terms and trying to understand the context and the everything. But that said,
Absolutely.
like, not everyone is going to do that. Not everyone should have to do that to experience a work. I think Star Wars is populist enough and certainly grand enough and multifaceted that there are so many accessible things, so many ways into the story, ways into the universe. And also, like Star Wars, I mean, I said it before, like Star Wars is not just a movie. It is a mythological framework. It is a mythical, it is a fictional universe. Most crassly, it's a brand. And where for Star Wars to be relevant enough to be remade for anyone to care, like it is kind of in a different class than just remaking a movie. It's like
Yeah.
there's like more at play here. So
Mm.
should they? I don't know, man.
so. Yeah,
Well, thank you, Bracey and John, for this very interesting discussion. It went in some places I didn't quite predict. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And that wraps up this special edition Trash Compactor episode for Star Wars Podcast Day 2023. We will be having more episodes drop later this year. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and rate the show. We are TrashCom Pod across all social media. Transcripts of this episode and all our other episodes can be found at trashcompod.com, and we will see you on the next one.